Hey BCAT family, it's Miss Deja here, and welcome back to How Real Can You Get, our realistic drawing class. As always, I hope that you are all having a wonderful day and you are all staying safe and healthy during this time. I hope that you guys are also getting out and enjoying some of this beautiful weather that we are having and remembering to stay safe and keep up with social distancing. In this lesson, it's going to be short as it was in the previous lesson that we did. I'm going to be going over more about shading form, and I'm going to be giving you guys some more examples about how to figure out your light and your shadows, figure out how to draw out and shade your cast shadows, figure out where your core lights are, your center lights, your highlights, your Terminator or our Bedbug Line. So I'm just going to be going over that again, and of course, as I always would like for you to do, is to follow along with me with your paper, your sketch pad, and your pencil, your pen, your marker color pencil, whatever you have available to you. Please utilize it and join me in this tutorial. I don't want to make this intro too long, so let's just jump right into it and get started with our lesson today on how to shade form. Now I'm starting off with some light sketches of my shapes that I will be shading. In this lesson, I will be shading a sphere, a square, a triangle, a cylinder, and a cone. I will be determining on my own where the light source will be coming from. When we begin to start shading objects and forms around our home, we may find it a little bit difficult to figure out exactly where the point of light source is coming from, and therefore where the shadow is the strongest and where it then fades out and becomes very soft. This is because typically when we are in our homes, we don't have the best lighting when it comes to high contrast between our dark and our light. So we don't necessarily have one point of light source in areas in our home. Most areas in our home can be either too lit or it can be too dark. So finding that balance between light and dark, and then finding where your cast shadow is actually going to be set and where your core shadow is, where that darkest part of your shadow will be, where the highlight will be, it can be a little bit confusing because there's light bouncing from everywhere on an object. But once we begin to draw out and shade objects in our home, it's really important that we keep in mind where exactly our light is coming from, and keep in mind how much light we are allowing that room to hit that object. If you don't have something like a lamp or a ring light to set next to the object that you would like to draw and give a good balance between shadow and light, then you can try to maneuver or manipulate, I should say, however you see fit to get the best possible effect of the darkest shadow, a cast shadow, and the lightest part of your form. And like I said a little bit earlier, it is very important to only use one light source so you don't confuse yourself while you are shading. Let's quickly go over our vocabulary terms once again and go over what these terms mean when it comes to art and how you can improve your craft by knowing these terms and applying it to your drawings. Now, when it comes to the characteristics of our cast shadow, it is very dependent on the intensity of our light source. A hard light will produce a cast shadow with a sharp edge, and a soft light will produce a cast shadow with a more blurry edge. The longer the cast shadow is from the object, the softer the edge of the shadow becomes. Notice how underneath my sphere, the cast shadow is darkest right underneath the sphere, and then it gets lighter and lighter as it goes out further away from the light source. Also, another thing to note about our cast shadow is it behaves in a predictable manner when on a flat surface, but when there are other levels or surfaces in the shadow's path, the shape can be altered depending on the surface over which it falls. So one thing you should always check for when you're drawing or you're painting, and really what you should ask yourself is, do the shadow shapes logically sit with the object and the lighting? It's all about being aware of where the light is coming from, and is it consistent with your picture? Once you begin to understand the basics of how light behaves, it is quite encouraging to think that a small amount of information can give you the knowledge you need to portray the illusion of form that we would like to achieve with our subject. Now let's go over our areas of form. Again, we did talk about this in our last lesson, but let's try to simplify it a little bit more and think of it as our 3 areas of a form. So when you're first starting, you just need to think of the 3 simple areas of a form. The first area is the light side. The light side includes the highlight and the halftones. The highlight again is the largest part where the light hits directly on the object. The halftones are always going to be lighter than any value on the shadow side and blend into the shadow side. Sometimes they can even be split into light halftones and dark halftones. The second area of form is the shadow side. This includes the form shadow core, and reflected light. The form shadow core is the darkest part of the shadow, whereas the rest of the form shadow is made up of dark tones that blend away from the core shadow into the reflected light, if there is any. The reflected light is the light reflected onto the subject from the surface it sits on, or ambient light around the object. And number 3 of our areas of form is our cast shadow, and this has 3 parts. The darkest part that sits directly under the object, the midtone, that makes up the majority of the cast shadow shape, and the lightest, softest tail of the cast shadow. Next is our shadow line. It is the transition between the light side and the shadow side. And this can have many names, as we went over before. We called it the Bedbug Line. It's also called the Terminator, the shadow line, or the form shadow line, to name a few. The main thing to remember about this is to keep each area clearly defined. Keeping your light tones in the light side and your darks in the shadows while maintaining a soft transition between the two is what we're trying to achieve. This may seem a little bit obvious, but making that smooth transition between the lights and the darks can be a bit difficult. It happens over a small area, and the most tricky thing is retaining the fullness of that globe shape. What you can do is gently lighten your pencil marks and try to build up a nice blend. Now when it comes to our light side, the highlight is the very lightest part. It's where the light directly hits the object, so is the best indicator when you look at your subject to determine where and at what angle the light is coming from. Highlights make the drawings come to life. It is the most important skill to obtain when you are drawing or painting. The halftones blend into the shadow side and make the highlight appear white. They are always lighter in value and the lightest value on the shadow side. When it comes to our shadow side, if a cast shadow is always hard, a form shadow is soft. It is the dark side on an object not facing the light that reveals the form and mass of the shape. The very darkest point within the form shadow is called the form shadow core. It falls under the shadow line, or Bedbug Line, or Terminator, on the darkest side, and is where there is no light hitting the surface. It blends into the rest of the form shadow, which is lighter in value because reflected or ambient light within the scene. Now let's talk about our reflected light, which I don't believe we went over in our last lesson. Reflected light is when the light is reflected onto an object from the surface it sits on. White or shiny surfaces reflect the most light. Dark or black surfaces reflect the least amount of light. In my shadings, you will see small hints of reflected light towards the bottom of my objects. So there we have it, guys. We have gone over our terms for shading again and have even learned a new term. I hope that you guys are finding this a little bit easier now that you know these words, and it helps you when you're applying it to your drawings and sketches. I think it will really help you if you guys wrote down these terms and just a short definition of what they mean next to them, and then complete some sketches underneath it so that you can associate these different terms with your sketches. Other than that, keep practicing on your sketches and your drawings. Keep practicing on your shading. If you mess up, don't worry about it. Do not be too hard on yourself. Just continue to practice. Continue to build up your comfortability with it at your own pace. Make sure you're saving all your sketches and all your refined drawings as well, and try to email it to me. I would love to see them. So as always, continue to sketch and draw every single day when you do have that free time to build up your craft and fine-tune it even more. And as always, I do wish you guys the best of luck when it comes to creating your sketches and refining them into finished drawings. I know it can be a little bit frustrating and aggravating when it doesn't come out the way that you want it to, but that's why we will continue to practice this every day. So until next time, good luck, guys, and I will see you in the next lesson.